right? So questions of isnad, of ascription, of authorship, then the actual motivations of the travelers, of Ibn Fadlan, Ibn Jubair, Ibn Battuta. I will share some biographical information about them in a moment, but I want you to consider, my dear sisters, the larger question of the motivations of these particular authors. With the three of them, I think it's important to note that you cannot really kind of separate the motivations of these travelers and the writings they produced from sort of the need to what's the best word here? Kind of the need to both acknowledge sort of official, kind of like official kind of narratives, as well as the need to actually sort of satisfy a larger public. And what I mean by that is that if part of what you are doing as as a traveler, like in the case of Ibn Fadlan, if part of what you are doing is that you are actually embarking on this journey and you've been ordered to chronicle what you see because there is sort of an official narrative that you're thinking about, you want to buttress the authority of the current kind of government or sultan or what have you, you can't really kind of separate the motives of that traveler from the idea that they are writing with a view to kind of validating the fact they've actually been sent to do this by the authority, by the caliph, by the sultan. So that's one thing. So that is going to kind of affect their writing in a sense. But the other is that, they're not entirely sort of writing this on behalf of the sort of official that's going to send them out to do this. There's also, they're writing also with the view to posterity. They're writing this for a public that's actually very interested in kind of following what they're doing. So that's something that kind of comes across in the Jerry Bentley piece, that the travelogue itself, my dear sisters, is actually interesting as an historical artifact. In the sense that the travelogue, yes, it's going to tell us something about the places they go, the people with whom they interact, the customs they observe, the routes that they take, the difficulties they have, the observations that they record, right? We learn a lot about the world during that time, but we also learn something about the often fraught relationship between the scholar and the kind of political authority that would, in many cases, actually underwrite the trip, and how they have to actually kind of, when they think about things, they're thinking about this with a view to kind of like the official narrative, but they're also thinking about their own legacy. They're thinking about posterity. They're thinking about a wider audience that they perhaps want to, or potential benefactors that they want to kind of entertain or impress. So again, that's why the travelogue is so fascinating, because it's not just a contemporaneous account of the world as it existed during the time of Ibn Fadlan or Ibn Jubair or Ibn Battuta, but it also tells us something about, like I said, the relationship between that scholar and the people in power, as well as how that person was actively thinking about his legacy. So it's a document that obviously, we're not going to kind of accept it without sort of any filters. We have to kind of apply some filters. But I also think that it helps us to kind of understand the way that they kind of view their world in terms of boundaries, in terms of borders, in terms of belonging, in terms of how they saw themselves as Muslims traveling through these lands, whether these were lands that were more established for Islam, these were more kind of Dar al-Harb, whether they were dealing with newly converted Muslims. The writings really kind of give us a window, and the writings give us, a window into not just how, not sort of how a traditional scholar, quote unquote, would have sort of assessed these different groups and these different people on the basis of their religiosity, right? That is definitely there. But there's also, kind of a sense of wonder as they write. There's a sense of that when they write, you're actually seeing on the ground how an actual Islamization process looks. And you see that in the writings of all three scholars, Ibn Fadlan, Ibn Jubayr and Ibn Battuta are all going to interact with people where you can kind of actually see that the scholar, the writer, the traveler is kind of struggling with, okay, this is how I know Muslims ought to behave. This is how they should be acting. These are the things they are supposed to do, but this is actually how these people are. So there you have that scholar really trying to reconcile as that scholar kind of moves out of that so-called Islamic center or core to these lands that are on the periphery. It's very interesting to actually see how they describe the people they meet and how they actually try to resolve that tension between the practice of Islam as they move farther and farther out of those heartlands. You know, it raises the question of how long does it actually take for people to really become more sort of established in what we call a more orthodox Islam. It also tells us something about these sort of bifurcated, or this idea of the world kind of being bifurcated between Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, that were these terms as rigid or as fixed as we are often led to believe, or was there more flexibility? And I think you can see that flexibility in terms of how these scholars describe their travels. And then again, this idea of Islamization is so interesting to me because one of the things that I'm going to be discussing, inshallah, in subsequent lessons is that the Islamization process is not as sort of neat and tidy as we would actually think. And the question that really kind of comes to mind, especially when you see Ibn Battuta and his travels a little bit further afield, kind of dealing with these Mongol and kind of Turkic groups, or Ibn Fadlan kind of dealing with these sort of Russian and kind of sort of Scandinavian and different Viking groups that he encounters. You know, it's really interesting in the sense that the word that comes to mind for me is sort of syncretism. And what we have to be able to do is to kind of figure out here, at which point do these newly converted Muslims kind of go from practicing a version of Islam that's quote unquote more authentic and less kind of syncretistic, is one of the thoughts that I had as I was reading these accounts. All right. So that was just kind of an introduction overall to the genre of travel narratives and why they're a little bit tricky for scholars looking at them, because they don't really know exactly where to place them. Again, is this religious writing? Why or why not? Is this secular writing? Why or why not? All right. So let me know if there are any questions or comments.